fighting game fans are just a few weeks away from SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy, the brand new SNK game that features some of their best female fighters, including Mai from Fatal Fury, Nakoruru from Samurai Shodown, and Athena from Psycho Soldier. To help celebrate the upcoming release, I wanted to talk about the origin of Yuri Sakazaki, a pivotal part of one of SNK's earliest Neo Geo fighting games. Turn back now if you don't want to know what happens next, because today we're going to be spoiling the story and ending for Art of Fighting in the arcades and on the Super NES. This is Game Over, the early years. I have a lot of respect for Art of Fighting. While most early 90s fighters were simply trying to imitate Street Fighter 2, this SNK classic attempted something a little different. It was more focused on the story, giving us a chance to follow the high-tension exploits of two students of the Kyokujin Karate Dojo. It's an interesting way to set your fighting game apart from the competition, but only if you don't screw up the ending. And that faint rumble you hear in the distance is what I'd like to call foreshadowing. Art of Fighting revolves around Ryo Sakazaki's frantic search for his missing sister, Yuri. As it turns out, Mr. Big has kidnapped Yuri, and Ryo and his friend-slash-rival Robert Garcia have traveled to Southtown to find answers and teach people the absolute worst way to open bottles of beer. So what we have here is a violent version of the telephone game. Ryo and Robert beat up a guy, he points to another person, they beat that guy up, and so on and so forth. This starts with Toto, who suggests that Jack at Mac's bar might know something about the kidnapping. Jack fights over supposedly being disrespected and ends up pleading that he never hurts women or children. He also thinks he saw the girl in Chinatown, so Ryo and Robert move on to the next destination. Surprise! The duo is ambushed the moment they enter Chinatown. Lee puts up a good fight before revealing that the bouncer at a restaurant named La Amour knows something about the kidnapping. The bouncer turns out to be a woman named King, who was primarily inspired and modeled after Grace Jones. That has nothing to do with the story, but I thought you might like to know. Anyway, King knows that Yuri is in a military ship, but only Mickey knows how to get in. So we kick his ass and he promises to take us to the port, but he's not going to go inside. This brings us to a fight with John on an aircraft carrier. Now, I don't want to derail this episode too much, but this is where the story starts to lose me. So what you're telling me is that Ryo and Robert just waltz right onto a military base, pick a fight, and then aren't immediately shot or arrested? The rest of the squad just watches as one of their own gets beaten up by a random dude? That seems unlikely. So we win the fight, and John points us to a nearby factory, which just so happens to be where Mr. Big hangs out. This is it, the fight we've all been waiting for. Except that it's not. You see, Mr. Big doesn't have Yuri, but he knows who does. And folks, it's real this time, I mean it. All Ryo has to do is drive back to the karate gym and fight a mysterious masked man. It's the toughest fight yet, leading to the moment we've all been waiting for. Here's what happens next.
Oh! Yuri, 大丈夫か? 心配したんだぞ. Yuri.
私はなんともないの。お兄ちゃん、その人、私たちの。
Wait, what? Okay, so this is the reason why I wanted to highlight Art of Fighting. This is an abysmal ending. It's basically the perfect example of what not to do. Look, I get it. You want to leave the story open enough for a sequel, but what SNK does here is just a slap in the face to anybody who spent the money to beat it in the arcades, or, God forbid, bought the $200 cartridge. The game ends with half of a sentence and a to-be-continued screen. And not just a regular to-be-continued screen, but one that leaves us with a lot of doubt. To be continued? I mean, sure, we now know that SNK did eventually continue the story, but that wasn't a given in 1992. There are plenty of games with cliffhanger endings that never get a sequel, so it's important to make sure the ending is satisfying enough on its own. Go ahead, leave something open for part 2. What you need to do is make sure the fans don't feel cheated. This is just insulting. So apparently Takara agreed with me because they decided to include a much longer and significantly more satisfying ending in their 16-bit ports of Art of Fighting. Guys, it's not even a contest. This is the ending you get if you beat the Super NES version.
Stop, Rio!
Yeah, that's more like it. This is how you create a satisfying ending that works as a way to set up a sequel. And this ending does more than that, because it effectively connects Art of Fighting with SNK's other early 90s series, Fatal Fury. This is something we saw more of in the sequels, and of course the long-running King of Fighters spin-off. But even if none of those other games existed, this would still work as a standalone story. Ryo and Robert lead an investigation that concludes with saving Yuri, only to find out that there's a big twist ending that nobody saw coming. That's how you're supposed to end a fighting game whose main gimmick is its storytelling conceit. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but way to go, Takara! Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Game Over, The Early Years. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post a new episode every Monday. So here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite SNK fighting franchise? Are you a fan of Fatal Fury? Maybe World Heroes? The King of Fighters? Last Blade? Or maybe it's the game we're talking about here today, Art of Fighting. Personally, I have to go with either Samurai Shodown or The Last Blade. I guess I just like games with weapons. Let me hear your picks in the comments below. In other news, I'm currently hard at work on a bunch of reviews, as well as the return of Electronic Gaming Monthly's Best and Worst. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.